Hey, beautiful people of the internet, how are you guys doing today? Hopefully great, and welcome back to another Warframe video. Of course, we are going to be taking a closer look on Temple. If you guys didn't know, he is the newest Warframe when it comes to Warframe 1999's current state, and as you guys can tell by the gameplay in the background, he hits like an absolute truck or an absolute unit, just like how that one cartoon, I think it's called Regular Time, the absolute unit. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comment section. But anyways, this is going to be a build for Temple, and we're going to be showing you guys exactly how you guys can go and shred the enemies and burn them to an absolute crisp. But ladies and gentlemen, before I continue with this video any further, if you guys would like to support me or the channel any further, do remember to leave a like on this video. It always helps me out substantially. Don't forget to spot and click the subscribe button for more Warframe videos and streams. I am currently trying to go and do YouTube full time, and my goal currently is I want to go and hit 3,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I'm hoping that we can go and achieve this. Without you guys, this goal is, inachievable. Without further ado, let's get this video on the road, shall we? Alright, just like every other build video, we're going to be skimming through all of Temple's abilities. So starting off with his passive, play abilities in sync with the backbeat metrodome to invigorate abilities effects while increasing ability efficiency by 50%. Essentially, this just means that if you guys are able to go and activate any one of Temple's abilities while being in sync with the metrodome itself, you'll then enhance the ability itself, because every other ability has a secondary ability or tertiary effect to it. Therefore, you'll get that ability, and on top of that, your efficiency will be increased by 50%. In other words, you'll be able to activate the enhanced version of any one of Temple's abilities and also use less energy at the same time. Moving on to his first ability called Pyrothentics. I believe I did pronounce that correctly. If I didn't, I'm sorry. But essentially, you're going to be blasting the enemy's targets with pillars of heat damage. Now, if you guys are able to activate the backbeat timing, then you're going to be able to go and ignite the pillars even more and increasing their damage or the heat damage on Rip as well when it deals damage itself. So in other words, activating the timing or the sweet spot for Pyrothetics, you'll be able to go and increase the damage of your third ability called Rip as well. However, more on how that ability works later on in the video. Moving on to the second ability called Overdrive. Drive loudspeakers into an epic distortion to create a damaging wave of heat damage while also increasing vulnerability to critical chance. The stationary ability essentially, backbeat timing doubles the critical chance, increases the duration of heat damage of Rip as well when it deals damage. So once again, if you guys are able to go and hit that sweet spot, then you're able to go and increase Rip as well damage even further. But once again, more on how that ability works in the future. Now, Overdrive essentially just increases your critical chance onto enemies. However, I do want to mention this. It's a good ability on paper, however, it's not the most effective because the critical chance will only be doubled on affected enemies. Meaning that if you have Overdrive effect activated with the sweet spot, then you're only going to be able to, get that increased critical chance on affected target. And trust me, the range is not exactly that good, and I know you can just go and upgrade the range. However, I generally believe that if you guys are playing in the end game, you shouldn't be going through so much struggle just to go and increase your overall damage. Finally, we are going to be talking about Rip as well. Now, if you guys know, activating your first and second ability within the sweet spot increases this ability's overall damage. And the way that Rip as well works is as follows. Rip out guitar to make Temple briefly invulnerable while hearing them. Allies' weapon in affinity range are lit up with extra heat damage. Each time an ability is used on the backbeat, a successful hits the enemies. Backbeat timing. Invulnerability lasts longer. So essentially, you pull out this guitar, you restore your health and shields, and while you guys are playing your guitar, the enemies aren't able to go and kill you or damage you. However, if you guys are able to do the sweet spot on the Rip as well, you then get your invulnerability to last a little bit longer. However, every time you go and play your guitar, you'll always increase your heat damage by some sort of interval. However, unfortunately, it does stack up to 750% heat damage. I'm not too sure if it's multiplicative or additive. That you guys are going to have to do some extra research on your own time. But essentially, Rip as well just gives you more heat damage on your allies' weapons. This also includes yours, and it's also great for healing yourself if you guys need to go and do so, because Ripper's Well always gives you guys some extra, breathing room if you guys really do need it. Finally, we have the final ability called Exalted Solo. Once a charge has been built up on the backbeat Metrodome, set Lizzie aflame and torch the enemies with heat damage. While aimed, Lizzie blasts enemies with a tremendous elemental sound waves. Use ability controls to change the elemental damage type. The backbeat timing is no energy will be consumed. Now, just like the description does suggest, we are going to be pulling out the Qatar and we're going to be using it just like an exalted weapon. Now, as for the build for Temple, I do want to mention to you guys, I've already added one Forma onto the build. However, I don't exactly remember what exactly did I actually go and replace. So this is the build as follows. Here we've got corrosive projection because we're going to be dealing with a lot of armored enemies. You guys can add, the one for shield disruptor. That way it lowers the shield. You guys can always switch that up for that, or energy siphon, depending on which faction you guys are fighting. But I'm mainly dealing with armor, so corrosive projection just makes life so much easier when it comes to killing those enemies at a relatively quick rate. Next up is we are going to be rolling around with the following mods. We've got Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, Augur Secrets, Precision Intensify for our increased in power strength. The more power strength we have, the more damage our number 4 ability will go and deal. As you guys can tell, as the way it currently is, we are going to be dealing a 4.8 times critical damage multiplier. And then on top of that, because we're going to be dealing with heat damage, I've gone ahead and added Archon Vitality. If you guys didn't know, the primary use of it just gives us more health, which is a benefit. However, the only reason why we want this particular mod is because it doubles our current heat damage. Instead of dealing one single instance of heat damage, it'll go and double it. And because, we're going to be dealing with our Exalted Solo and the rest of Temple's abilities, this mod comes in clutch. Next up is we are going to be rolling around with Streamline to increase our efficiency. Therefore, we don't get caught with our Pantsam, because at the end of the day, you are always going to be cycling through all of these abilities just so that you can go and use your Exalted Solo. Next up is we are going to be using Primed Flow to increase our general energy economy. Therefore, we have a lot of energy to go and work with. And finally, we are going to be adding Primed Continuity to increase our overall duration. The reason why we want to go and do this is just so that our abilities actually have some sort of longevity in the works. Next up is we are going to be rolling around with the following arcanes. Arcane Energize, therefore we can go and replenish our energy relatively easy. Therefore we can go and actually go and dominate a lot of the enemies, because at the end of the day, you guys can have the most insanely powerful build, the most min-maxed one out of the entire Warframe universe, but if you have no energy, then your build is useless. Next up is we are going to be adding a brand new arcane called Arcane Hotshot. Now I understand that not everybody will be able to go and get this arcane, and trust me, it is going for at least 1,000 platinum for an entire set. And the reason why it's so expensive is because it is extremely time consuming and rare to get, and of course it is very powerful. Essentially what this will do is, let me just give you guys the maxed out version. Okay, gain 6% weapon critical chance for 10 seconds when using abilities to inflict heat damage status effects on the enemies, maximum of 50 stacks. So essentially, if you guys do basic, math, it'll give you 300% critical chance just for hitting the enemies with a ton, or just not even a ton of heat damage, just hitting them entirely with heat damage. You'll then be getting a free 300% critical chance just by hitting the enemies with heat damage. And this is for all weapons, not secondary, not this, not just melee, everything. So this arcane is very good, especially on Temple, because all of your abilities are heat based. So really hitting the enemies with like heat is not going to be a problem whatsoever. And because we're going to be utilizing all of these abilities, because they do synergize with one each other, you're always going to be activating Arcane Hotshot. But as you guys can tell, because yours truly hasn't really had too much time to go and play Warframe, and even if I've had time to go and play it, we're only able to get one Arcane Hotshot per week. I also do want to mention that we are actually able to go and mod the Exalted weapon itself. And the name of it is Lizzie, and this is the Qatar that shoots out flames. However, as you guys can tell by the stats, you guys can go and modify it yourselves. So I also do want to mention, before I go over all the mods, as you guys can tell, we are actually able to go and add arcanes to our pseudo exalted based weapons. As you guys can tell, I've gone and added primary merciless, which gives me, 360% extra damage, right? And I also get an increase of 30% reload speed. Now the reload speed is irrelevant, but this is an easy way to go and proc this particular arcane, because all you have to do is go around and kill 12 enemies, and then boom, you've got 360% damage. As for the mods, we have the following. We've got Amalgam Strike or Amalgam Serration, which gives us more damage and sprint speed. We've got Galvanized Scope, Heavy Caliber for more, raw damage and critical chance. Galvanized Chamber for even more multi-shot. If we then go and kill the enemies, we get even more multi-shot. Point Strike to go and increase our critical chance. Vital Sense, because we're dealing with crit based stuff, it only makes sense to go and increase our overall critical damage, because at the end of the day we want to go and see big boy numbers, so it only makes sense to go and increase our critical damage multiplier. And finally, we are going to be rolling around with our 2 elemental mods of choice, Infected Clip and Cryo Rounds, which actually give us viral. Cold plus toxin equals viral. And finally, because we are dealing with a beam based weapon, we are also going to go and add Sinister Reach in our X-list slot, because at the end of the day, Sinister Reach will always increase the length of our flamethrower. That's the way I like to think of it as. And also it'll allow us to go and start hitting enemies from a relatively far distance, because the one downside of Lizzie is the fact that it is only meant for extreme close quarters. This gives us an extra 12 meters of range, which is super good. So as you guys can tell, we are currently in the simulacrum, which will allow us to then go and demonstrate how this particular build does perform. Now I do want to mention that in order to go and utilize the Exalted Solo or the guitar, just to go and burn the enemies to a crisp, you guys simply have to go and make sure that you hit all your abilities on that sweet spot. What I mean by that is, if you guys take a look at the very center of my cross screen, you'll see there'll be a pin that's going left and right. And as you guys can tell, every time it interacts with that middle portion of the cross screen, it'll start glowing orange, which means that you'll be able to go and, this is the sweet spot. This is the ultimate time to go and activate an ability. So what you guys simply want to do is ensure that you do have energy. And the way this build works is as follows. First and foremost, activate your number 1. Make sure that that bar is within that sweet spot. Therefore, you guys can have a full duration or full bar, which will allow you to then go and pull out your guitar. So we're then going to go and do so. Then we're going to activate our number 3 ability. We can do this a variety of amount of times, so long as we do have energy, but doing so will always gradually increase your overall heat damage to your weapons and your allies' weapons as well. Then we want to hit them with our number 2 with 2 beats in a row. Sometimes doesn't go through just because of the fact of the animation. Then you'll see this little icon around them. Then you can start beaming them, and then you'll be able to go and double your critical chance. Now I do want to mention to you guys that the number 2 is pretty decent. It's not too bad, especially if you guys are able to go and hit those notes side by side. However, the only downside is it is going to be a little bit difficult to go and perform, because you have to be focusing on the sweet spot at all times. And also another thing I do want to mention is that number 2 ability is only going to allow you to double your crit on affected enemies. So for instance, if we go and hit them with the double crit, you'll see that we're in red crit territory and these enemies drop fast. However, if you hit them like these enemies, then you guys can see we are only orange critting. However, they do drop relatively fast, and trust me, the red crits have a substantial difference when it comes to damage. As you guys can tell, the higher our crits, the better, which is another reason why I decided to go and add Arcane Hotshot, because at the end of the day, all you have to do is hit the enemies with a whole bunch of heat proc, not even kill them. And because you are going to be hitting them with heat procs, then you're going to be able to just synergizes really well with Temple. Now I don't unfortunately have the maxed out version, but the critical chance is definitely boosted, and you guys can simply hit enemies with your abilities, and you don't have to hit all the enemies. All you have to do is just make sure that that buff is up, because remember, you can refresh it, and all you have to do is just proc heat procs onto enemies, and you'll be at constant 300%. And that's assuming that you guys actually do have a maxed ranked version. Now I currently only have a ranked 3 version of this arcane, so my crits will be slightly higher. So if you guys only have a rank 2 one and you wonder why are your results different from mine, it's only because of the fact that, well, I do have Arcane Hotshot on, which is the rank 2 version. So like I said, if you guys are able to hit them with Temple's number 2 ability and affect all the enemies that you want to kill, it's good. But if you want something more reliable like hotshot, that is another option, and I highly recommend you guys just go and slot it in. Now, it's not entirely that bad doubling your crit, but you know, it always makes life so much easier if you're able to conveniently increase your damage. Because remember, if you guys are currently playing the, you know, end game or any survival mission, then you know, kills per second will make a big difference. Even if you're not playing end game, it's always helpful to have consistent damage and no damage fall off whatsoever, and temple is exactly that. Ladies and gentlemen, I make some pretty awesome Warframe content, so if you guys like to go from 0 to hero as fast as humanly possible, you guys can go ahead and do so by taking a look at the rest of my videos. They will be suggested to you guys at the top right of the video or the top left. I still don't know where YouTube decides to go and put these. And of course, if you guys want a more direct approach to go and watch some of my videos, I'll be leaving some links down in the description. Therefore, you guys can go from 0 to hero as fast as humanly possible. If you guys like to support me or the channel any further, do remember to leave a like on this video. It always helps me out substantially. Spot and click the subscribe button for more Warframe videos and streams. I'll make like a banana and split.